Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar from Unionlearn. Today's subject is Green Skills for a Just Transition. If you're wondering what a just transition is, all will be explained very soon. Before we get going, just a little bit of housekeeping. So I'm Anna from the TUC, and I'll be introducing you to our other speakers in just a second. But just like I said, a little bit of housekeeping. Many of you will have done our webinars before, but for those of you that are new, on the right-hand side of the screen, there's a chat panel. Please use this to chat to each other, to exchange tips and ideas, and my colleagues from Unionlearn will be posting links and resources there throughout the webinar. Don't worry if you miss anything, because we are making a recording, and if you want to check any details later, we'll be sending you a link to the recording later today. So yeah, please don't worry if you need to go off. Underneath us here, there's a Ask a Question button. Please post questions there for our panel, and we'll get to them after we've made the presentation. So let's talk about climate change and environmental issues. And I think we'll all agree that these issues are increasingly moving up the trade union agenda in the workplace. And unions are working together and forming partnerships to tackle what is seen by many as the biggest issue of the 21st century. One aspect of this is the way that unions will work to ensure workers have an opportunity to develop the new skills needed for a net zero carbon economy, something that will also be vital for the recovery over the coming years. So developing green skills at work has the potential to offer a wide range of exciting opportunities to workers across the UK. And the trade union movement will be leading the way in supporting the fight against climate change and helping workers to build the skills that will be part of this. So because of all of this, Unionlearn today are launching a new publication called Cutting Carbon, Growing Skills, Green Skills for a Just Transition. And this new publication explores these issues and gives examples of where unions are making a difference. It's important for me to just add at this point, for any viewers who have joined us who live in Wales, that there are some differences with this agenda in Wales due to devolution. And the Wales TUC General Council has recently agreed its own statement on a green recovery and just transition in Wales. And the Wales TUC is publishing their own publication on this next week, June the 3rd, I think. And the Wales TUC is developing some additional resources on green skills for reps in Wales to reflect where there are differences. And these will be available on our website over the coming months. So please do look out for that. Right, so as I said, colleagues from Unionlearn will post up a link to the publication and other resources throughout this morning. Right, onto our panel. So joining us for today to tie in with this publication report is our author, Graham Peterson, Sarah Woolley, who's the General Secretary of the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union, and TUC's Senior Policy Officer, Tim Page. So I'll tell you a little bit about each one before we can ask them some of the questions on this issue. Graham Peterson is the Secretary of the Greener Jobs Alliance. He's a UCU member and former TUC tutor who has produced a range of green skills publications and training materials for the UCU and for the TUC. Sarah Woolley this year became General Secretary of the BFAWU, and for some time has been promoting the green agenda in workplaces and negotiating environmental training for workers. She joined the BFAWU as a weekend assistant at Baker's Oven and feels that union learning has been an important part of her journey through the union. And finally, Tim Page, who is a Senior Policy Officer at the TUC. He's responsible for economic and industrial policy. He also covers science and high performance workplaces. So first questions for Tim. The TUC sees just transition as vital to the future of work. Can you tell us what a just transition is and why this is a trade union issue?
Well, thanks, Anna, and welcome to all of our guests. I mean, a just transition is actually a concept that was developed by the international trade union movement. And what it means is that as our economy changes, as we move towards that net zero economy by 2050, we'll see some jobs in high fossil fuel, high energy sectors will gradually disappear. And some new jobs will be created in green sectors, in sustainable industries, some of them that we don't even know what they will be yet. But what's crucial is that as we make that journey, those working in the old sectors, the sectors that are likely to decline, find new jobs, new skills, and new opportunities in the new sectors. Now, this won't just happen by accident. When just transition is talked about internationally, the example that's often given is moving away from the mining industry. And the UK's history of moving away from the mining industry shows you everything that could be shown about an unjust transition. This was an industry that was simply closed, the communities died, the opportunities for the workers died, and there was nothing left for them. So we can't make that mistake again. We have to ensure that, as we move away from these high energy sectors, we take the workforce with us and create new opportunities. Now, the environmental movement is fantastic. We work with them a lot. But it's trade unions that have particularly put this issue of a just transition onto the agenda, because after all, we are the guarantors of people's jobs and people's skills. So just transition is particularly a trade union issue. It's great that it's moving up the agenda. It's great that more and more government is talking about it. International organisations are talking about it. Environmental organisations are talking about it. But we have to keep pushing this so that we don't have a repeat of that horror story from the 1980s, where hundreds of thousands of people lost their jobs and didn't have new opportunities to go to.
Thanks, Tim. And thanks for that really useful analogy. I think to be able to compare it with the move away from mining is a helpful way to imagine it. Okay, so the next question is for Graham. So my question is, unions in some workplaces have green or environmental reps. What are green reps and how can they play a part in this just transition?
Okay, thanks, Anna. I suppose the simple answer to that question is that green reps are members who take on a role within their union on climate-related issues. And different unions have certain approaches to this. They're not all the same. And of course, the names sometimes differ. They're called environmental reps or climate reps, sustainability reps. The important thing, I suppose, is that they are seen as representatives and not just individuals within a workplace. And that's where I think there have been some concerns about terms like sustainability champions or environmental champions, because we see this as something that's actually part of union organisation and structure. And I suppose there are certain key issues that are worth outlining on it. The first one is that I think reps must be integrated into the branch structure of the workplace. I know there's been a question put up, I think, about whether reps should also be health and safety reps, and certainly that is one approach. And some unions do actually recommend that as a way to go. The reason being because they do have a legal entitlement to time off and recognition from the employer, and that there is a very big crossover on things like air pollution and other issues which affect both health and safety and the environment. But whoever does the job, it is vital that they are seen as part of the branch and that they take part in a way that means that they're answerable to the branch and can report back to it. I suppose another issue is that the need to make sure that they're engaged at all levels of the union. So it's going to be crucial that unions operate on this issue at regional, sector and national level to support local reps. And so there is this feed through in terms of what needs to be done at all levels in which the union operates. Another issue, of course, is that green reps have a great opportunity to address issues around social justice. Because, of course, when we talk about things like green skills and work opportunities, there are issues around inequalities and certainly around gender and race and vocational training opportunities. And so, therefore, I think it's important that green reps make sure that they're aware of that and address it. And I suppose the final thing in relation to what we need to think about when we're talking about green reps is the support and resources that they're going to need, because this is potentially, a mammoth operation. I don't want to put people off, but the range of things which a green rep could be responsible for or addressing in the workplace, from energy management right through to training issues, water, recycling, all kinds of things. But these are issues which are going to need a lot of support, both time off in terms of facility time to do this job, and help in terms of training and information from their union. And then there's, of course, the wider issue of how that links to collective bargaining and organisation in the workplace.
Thanks, Graham. Yeah, I think a really important takeaway from that is about how a green rep is integrated within the union structures. I think obviously if we work together, it's often a more straightforward way to see results, I think. So thank you for that. Next question is for Sarah. So the BFAWU has been working with employers such as Greg's to promote environmental training for workers. Can you explain a bit about this, please, and how it has worked?
I can, thank you. Greg's is a great example of an employer who we were literally pushing an open door with. We moved the climate change motion at TUC Congress back in 2017 and approached them to discuss implementing green reps using the TUC's model agreement. They were initially reluctant to add another layer of reps and meetings and bureaucracy. I think the term was used to the comprehensive structure we already have with Greg's, both locally and nationally. And we agreed that as they already have a safety, health and environment, or as they call it, SHE team, we would begin by expanding the role of the health and safety reps. At that point, we weren't in a position ourselves to be able to give green reps training, as we were still at the very start of our kind of journey, introducing green reps. So they kind of said, we'll do a joint approach. They've done some environmental management system training, and they adapted it to cover kind of expanding the health and safety reps role. And we trialled it with the national retail health and safety reps and then went from there. The first session we kind of covered explaining what a carbon footprint is, because people don't necessarily know, or if they do know, they don't have a full understanding, how it's worked out and how that then can go into changes within the shops and how it can be reduced in the shops, such as turning a dishwasher on an hour later, and pointing out that that little difference in that shop, when it's spread across 2,000 shops, actually becomes quite a massive difference. And then we have further sessions around waste waste management and energy use. We've not quite got it rolled out nationally yet with all the reps. COVID-19 hasn't helped with that, but a couple of the reps have utilised the slides that we've used and the training resources that we've had, and spoken to their comrades in their regions. We've also adapted the health and safety checklist to incorporate environmental issues and measures, such as checking whether the management teams and the staff in the shop have an understanding of the energy tool that's on the back office that shows them when their peaks and troughs are. And what it's done is it's helped to engage the reps. It's given them more knowledge and understanding of the difference that can be made and the importance of making that difference, and that they can then pass that knowledge on to other people. We're not quite there yet with other employers in terms of working together like this, but we know there's lots of good work going on out there in terms of environmental committees that usually branch secretaries are placed on, but we know we've got a lot more work to do. But Greg's is certainly kind of an example of what can be achieved when you work together.
Thanks, Sarah. Really interesting to hear about this work that's been taking place in Greg's, and yeah, they've certainly managed to achieve a lot by doing this. So I've got another question for Tim. The recent TUC report that was published last week, A Better Recovery, highlighted sustainable industry as one of its 6 key areas. Please, can you explain why new green jobs and skills are vital to the economy and to our recovery?
Yeah, certainly. And this kind of relates to a question I've just seen in the chat from Joe, who's asked, how do we keep the message about the transition to good green jobs in the context of COVID-19 and the recession that seems likely to follow? You know, we're at one of those pivotal moments in economic history. You know, in 1945, at the end of the war, people wanted to build a different kind of an economy, a fairer economy, a more productive economy. You know, there was a kind of general push at these moments of crisis to create something different. And as Joe says, we are, you know, the economy is going to be facing a really, really tough time for a while. We're going to need politicians and government ministers, businesses, trade unions to think very differently about the kind of economy and the kind of intervention that we need to build. Now, in the context of that, people are saying, can we do better than we've been doing so far? Can we do greener than we've been doing so far? You know, how can the UK be a leading player in sustainable industry in the future? And this is something that the TUC has been thinking a lot about. So, for example, the government has declared that it's going to phase out diesel and petrol cars by 2035. Now, the motor industry is vital to areas like the Midlands, with the Toyota plant in Derbyshire, with you know, the whole history of motor industry in the West Midlands, along with Nissan up in Sunderland. So, you know, we want to be there, ensuring that as battery technology develops, as electric cars develops, those new greener cars, greener forms of transport, provide opportunities for workers in the UK to be building and maintaining those cars. You could say the same about wind turbines. You know, wind offshore. The UK is a leader in offshore wind, but trade unions tell us that the most of the high-tech, high-skill jobs in offshore wind go to Germany and they go to Denmark. They don't come to the UK. The UK tends to get the lower skill, lower value jobs. Why is that? Because Germany and Denmark have been doing industrial strategy for decades. They have a fantastic skill system. They have the infrastructure in place, and they have nimble government that knows how to make quick interventions to support their industries. So private sector companies, when thinking, well, where do we place this investment? Do we place it in the UK or do we place it in Germany? You know, understandably think the UK is a higher risk. So we need to be thinking about what our economy looks like, what our government looks like, what our industrial strategy looks like, if we want to be in a position where we're winning those high-skill, high-value jobs in the future. And apart from anything else, Anna, you know, young people are demanding this of us. You know, young people are leading the way on the green agenda. They are saying, this is our planet for the future. You know, it's not for older politicians, older economists, older anybody, older business leaders to carry on with an economic model that's damaging the future of our planet. So people won't, even if the government didn't ban petrol and diesel cars, people are less and less likely to want to buy them. And you can apply that to all kinds of things that consumers want to buy, services that consumers want to use. So, you know, there is a social demand for this change. There's an economic demand for this change. And the challenge for the UK, and trade unions are up for this challenge, is how do we ensure that we get a good share of that new industry, those new skills, those new jobs coming to the UK for our workforce. That's where the TUC's focus is on. And that's what we were talking about in that Better Recovery document. And we'll be talking about this more and more in the weeks and the months to come.
Thanks, Tim. Really interesting to hear about the future of the economy. And I think, like you said, younger people are demanding this, probably in no small thanks to Greta. I can say she's known by one name. Not many people can do that. Okay, so next question is for Sarah. So workplaces, such as those involved in food production, will need to cut down their carbon usage drastically over the coming years. How do you see unions such as yours being able to support these changes that are likely, that are going to need to be made?
Okay, so I think we can support in a number of ways. I'll just focus on three. Firstly, if you look at our trained reps in other areas such as health and safety reps, shop stewards, Unionlearn reps, they tend to have more knowledge, more understanding and definitely more training of their particular field than the managers that they sit across from. You know, it's certainly the case in health and safety issues. And green reps should be no different to that. You know, we should be training them to the same standard as the rest of the reps in the branch, as Graham mentioned earlier. And mixing that knowledge with their day-to-day experience of working on the shop floor makes our reps the right people to sit around the table and discuss what changes should be made in the workplace and how they can be made without impacting terms and conditions, for example, or making the workplace unsafe. So that's one way that we can help as a trade union. The second way we can support is to share best practice. So creating networks between the green reps. I know PCS have got a fantastic green reps network that should be something we all aspire to having. And they can look at what's happening around the industry and help raise everyone to a better place and a better standard. And finally, through our learning services, we can help educate the members and the wider workforce around what the need for the change is, about that need for the change, about the impact of climate change and what will happen if we do nothing. And those are all areas that, as trade unions, you know, there's only us that can do that. Nobody else can.
Absolutely. We still have that, I think, unique access in the workplace that other organisations don't. You mentioned there, Sarah, about training of particularly safety reps. And before we go on to the last question to Graham, I just wanted to pick on something that's been posted in the chat. That someone has said it would be helpful to have like a legal basis for green reps and a green book, much like we have a brown book for safety reps, or even add green pages to the brown book to keep health and safety and green issues interlinked. So perhaps we can sort of, you know, come back to that idea. Or Graham, my question to you is about training, so perhaps it would be relevant there. So you are secretary to the Green Jobs Alliance, which provides a number of free online courses. Could you talk about the training that is available to members interested in learning more? And perhaps if you've got any thoughts on this idea of a green book or green pages, maybe we could think about that as well.
Yes, got plenty of thoughts on that. This is something we've been campaigning for some time now. The idea that you know, you can expect people to carry out a role like this without having statutory support like union learning reps and safety reps have got is a real problem. So we do need to address that, and we need to be making this ask of government that if you're serious about engaging with unions around the issue of skills and climate change, you do actually have to make sure that people have got the recognition that they need to undertake that role. So I think that is a crucial question. And of course, tactically, there's the issue of what's the best way to do it? Should it just be added on to something like the Brown Book with safety reps' rights, or does it need a standalone policy? So I think that has got to be a priority for the trade union movement, how we try and reinforce that position for green reps. In terms of the training that's available, I mean, the Green Jobs Alliance nearly 10 years ago produced something called a Green Skills Manifesto, because we were aware that there was this real problem of a lack of integration of skills into things like climate policy and industrial strategy policies. And not only that, but then there was also a problem that even in skills policies, there was a lack of any reference to climate related or green skills. So to try and do what we could to address that and to provide some resources for unions, we did put up on our website a number of online modules. So we do have online modules available on climate change awareness, on just transition, and on air pollution. Again, making this link between the climate and health and safety and public health and worker health. So those are available. They're literally just 2 clicks of a button. They're free. You don't need to register. And we do see the need for unions to be looking at developing resources to support reps on this. I mean, these resources and others are designed to be used in a flexible way. I know branches have actually put on lunchtime sessions for their members to access this type of training. But I suppose the crucial backdrop to this is the fact that, we have got a government that has signed up for the Paris Agreement, which talks in Article 12 about the need to provide climate awareness training to people, and also to the Sustainable Development Goals, where we've got the goal on quality education and the goal on decent work. And both these things talk about the need to provide resources and support for climate education. So this is something which, there's already been a commitment at a national level to adopt, but we've actually still not seen that happen. And of course, there are the final point I want to make on this is, there's a real problem around vocational training in this country at the moment, and decent apprenticeships, which are absolutely crucial to this whole process of reskilling the emerging workforce. So that's something that I think is going to need a real focus, but it's not helped when you have got literally thousands of workers in further education and higher education at risk of losing their jobs. And this is at a time when we need education in the tertiary sector more than ever.
Thanks, Graham. Yeah, lots of points there for us all to think about. So I'm now going to look at what questions you, our audience, have posted for our panel. We'll try and get through as many of them as we can, but we've had quite a few. So the first one is about inequalities. And it asks, how can the inequalities associated with climate change be addressed in policies and practice? I'm wondering if, Tim, did you want to take that one first, or I'm guessing who it would be most suited for? Wave at me if you want to go first.
Well, as nobody else has volunteered, I mean, I'd be interested to know equalities in what sense people are asking. We know internationally there's certainly a real issue. So United Nations figures, for example, show that 80% of those around the world who are displaced by climate change are women. So there's a specific gender element to this, and I'm really kind of pleased that the TUC Women's Conference picked this up this year, and that the women in the TUC generally are taking climate change, well, I won't say taking climate change much more seriously. I'm sure they were always taking climate change much seriously, but are really giving a lead to this. They recognise that there's a distinct gender element to climate change. And of course, the communities around the world that are hit most by this are the poorest communities. Inevitably, the poorest, we know that the rich are those who pollute the most, and the poor are those who suffer from the pollution most. So, it's worth thinking about climate change in the context of an overall economic policy that's designed to create greater fairness, and that needs to be done both on a national level and an international level. So, going back to what I was saying earlier, if this crisis produces a new conversation about what kind of economy we want to have, that's not just a conversation that needs to take place in the UK. It's a conversation that needs to take place in international fora like the OECD and the World Bank and the IMF and all of the places where policymakers gather to develop future policy. So, I think the TUC wearing our internationalist hat would be saying, come on, government, take this up at an international level. This fight for a cleaner, more equal economy, more equal in terms of class, more equal in terms of gender, more equal in terms of racial economy. And I do think these themes knit together quite well.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I think that that was my assumption that the question was posing was about those inequalities. So we've had a question about apprenticeships. So the question is, what steps are needed to build apprenticeship numbers to address the skills needs of the future net zero carbon economy? Who shall I go to first with that? Would it be Graham?
To give a response to that. I think I mentioned earlier, apprenticeships are going to be crucial if they're done the right way. But unfortunately, we have had this problem recently about the very poor quality of apprenticeships that we've seen across a range of sectors. And a government target of 3 million new apprenticeships, which hasn't materialised, and so it's a question of both quantity and quality here. The TUC have produced a very good charter for apprenticeships, which sort of lays down some of the conditions and standards that we would want to see in any apprenticeship programme. And there's also the issue going back to the role of the tertiary sector, of who provides these. And so there is a big role for the further education sector. And that's very difficult at the moment because of the cuts that we're being faced with in that kind of provision. I suppose the thing I'd say about apprenticeships is that you could have a fantastic apprenticeship program that addressed green skills issues and the climate, but unless there's the demand and then the jobs following on from that for people to go into, then to some extent it's fairly meaningless. So where I think there's a real opportunity for unions and for local authorities is to look at what can be done at municipal level and in the regions using things like local enterprise partnerships and programs to drive this forward and to create the demand, create jobs at regional level where apprenticeships could play a key role as part of reskilling and ensuring that long-term jobs are available within a growing green sector there.
Thanks, Graham. Yeah, I think it's about the long-term viability of all of this, and apprenticeships are just like one part of that, although obviously we must bear their needs in mind because they're slightly different. I've got a question now for Sarah. How does food waste in catering facilities tie into this subject, and how do you think this can be tackled?
So obviously food waste is a massive issue, and a lot of the employers that we deal with have minimised their food waste by putting it out to food banks and charities. Greggs is a fine example of that. Again, that they have agreements with food banks locally and nationally. Some of the other companies have kind of looked into how to utilise the food waste to kind of turn it into energy and do things like that, but everything's kind of just in the early stages. A few companies are looking at how to utilise oil and biodiesel rather than diesel in the vans, but everything's still at like the tentative stages, I think. But food waste is a massive issue, and it's a massive issue in our country generally, the amount of waste that we throw away. And I think if we can utilise it, by using it rather than wasting it, that's going to help the situation.
Thanks, Sarah. Did anyone else have any comments on that particular question before we move on to the next one? No? Happy to go on. Okay, so the next question is about HS2. So the question that asks says, well, they say HS2 is a disaster for nature along the route. It's even less relevant now than ever before. Now we've discovered how well virtual meetings can work. How can I stop this when my union might support it? So am I giving this question to Graham? Was it Graham?
Okay.
Or Tim? I can go to Tim in a second. Sorry. Do you want me to go to Tim first?
No, well,
okay,
I'm happy to make a quick response. But I think there are going to be issues like this: HS2, airport expansion, fracking, nuclear, where people are going to have different views, and there are different views within unions themselves on the best way to go. I think we've got to respect that there are these differences, and I think certainly. I think we can all agree that public transport and the need to improve that infrastructure is actually going to be crucial in terms of delivering a zero carbon economy. So, when we talk about transport, we need to make sure that we're addressing both the short-term concerns around environmental damage and the longer-term considerations about actually removing fossil fuels from the transport sector. So HS2, I've got my own, individual views on that in the same way as I have with other, the more contentious issues that are around this agenda. But I would say that, we do need to have proper discussion looking at the at the range of options that are out there and recognizing that, whichever one you choose, there are always going to be some downsides, and you've always got to go for the one that's got more upsides than downsides, if that's not too much of a cop-out.
Thanks, Graham. Tim, did you want to add anything to that?
I mean, in a way, I think Graham's answered it really well. We tend to think quite black and white, don't we? We tend to think, in industry is a really good industry or a really bad industry, and actually the world's a little more complex than that. If ever you talk about HS2, there's a whole swathe of people, whatever you say, you'll make happy, and there's another swathe of people, whatever you say, you'll disappoint. And TUC policy, for what it's worth, is in favour of HS2. I know as an economist that our productivity lags France's productivity by a great deal. In other words, a French worker builds in 4 days what it takes a UK worker 5 days to build, and there's no one reason for that, but it's partly because the infrastructure in France is so good, and France has an awful lot of high-speed rail. We have one high-speed rail line, and that's the rail line that goes to France. So there is an issue around high-speed rail. I know there are some who argue that HS2 will benefit London more than it will benefit Birmingham and the North. It's a complex issue. But as Graham said, it's like I mentioned wind turbines earlier. Wind turbines are made of steel, and steel is a high energy intensive industry. So greening the steel production is key, but we're still going to need steel to make wind turbines. So, and it's good to say this is complex. We do live in a world at the moment where people want easy answers to complicated problems, and in a way, trade unions, I think, are at their best and the most creative when we embrace some of this complexity, but it is a difficult issue.
Well, absolutely. Thank you, Tim. And there's a couple of comments in the chat saying that for both you and Graham, you're being really tactful, and that's great. And one that I particularly like saying, democracy rocks as long as members have an educated debate. You can't say fairer than that. Okay, another question that we've had a few questions actually about green reps, and we touched on this a little bit earlier as to whether green rep should be a standalone position or should the green rep role be incorporated into health and safety. And there's another question related to this, about whether green reps who have been trained get full facility time, or are they restricted because of how branches might perceive them and how important they are maybe in comparison to other reps. So who wants to take this one? Will it be Sarah? You're nodding? Go for it.
I think in an ideal world, yes, you'd want a green rep to be a standalone position. Graham mentioned earlier it can be a huge role to undertake, and I think when I talk about the green reps and climate change, I always start off by saying it's such a massive subject area, it can easily become overwhelming. Unfortunately, we've not got the legislation behind it to recognise them standing as alone. So like we did in Greg's, incorporating it into another role initially means you've still got that work starting, and you've still got kind of your foot in the door with the hopes that you can build upon it later. And you can do that not only in health and safety, but in ULRs, in shop stewards. They all have their own different roles that they play within the branch that can incorporate the green reps if you can't get a standalone position, which would be the ideal position. The facilities time, again, this comes back to legislation and what you can ask for, and it's difficult. I don't think it is a case necessarily that they're not seen as relevant within the branch, and that's why they're not getting the facilities time. If they can't stand alone and demand it like you can for ULR or a health and safety rep. Unfortunately, we're not in a position where we've got a Labour government that said that they would put green reps in place, and it might be a while before we do. But PCS, like I mentioned earlier, have done some fantastic work around green reps and having them stand alone, and that's something that we're definitely looking to work towards. But in the first instance, incorporating it into other roles is definitely a start in the right direction.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I wonder whether Graham or Tim have anything to add on that. We've also got another question kind of linked to this that I'm just going to throw out there as well. Just 1 second. So again, it's about green reps. And the question says, is there any appetite for unions to establish these new roles for reps? So, for example, green reps, but another one they've suggested is mental health reps. And is there any appetite for integrating these roles with things like shop stewards? So sorry, the non-statutory roles, e.g. shop stewards with statutory roles like health and safety reps, ULRs. I'll let you go first on this, Graham, because we're touching on lots of different things here. So over to you.
Okay. I think that on the issue of facility time, it needs to be made clear to employers that, well, first of all, they're going to be expected to make sure their operations are consistent with moving towards a net zero arrangement within their organisation. And in order to do that, they're going to need to engage with the workforce. So therefore, they are going to need to talk to unions. And in turn, it follows that unions are going to need to have people who are going to front up those discussions. And the idea that you can do that, and this is, we're talking about things that could really impact heavily around terms and conditions of employment, future direction of the organisation. The idea that you can do that with no facility time at all is just a nonsense, quite frankly. So this has really got to be put out there as an issue for both employers, and for unions for that matter. That's why, in terms of some interesting developments that are taking place, I know in UCU, my union, for instance, one of the things we're doing is looking at how you can incorporate bargaining around climate into terms and conditions of and collective agreements. And that's, I think, where this ITUC initiative that's now becoming an annual thing on June the 24th of climate proofing your agreements is very relevant, so that you sit down with the employer and say, how are you going to actually move towards zero carbon? And we do need to talk about energy management. We do need to talk about things like facility time and policy, industrial relations policies, and a framework for the operation of green reps. So that's one way to do it. And I think that, whether we're talking about the Brown Book, there's got to be a lead in to actually try and establish this as something that's legitimate and not something that people are expected to do in their own time.
Sure. Thanks, Graham. And there's a good comment that's just appeared in the chat that relates to the question as well, saying that the lessons that we've perhaps all learned from getting ULRs embedded is a need to ensure that any new rep role is well integrated into branches and that they're part of the wider union. And that can, of course, help the individual rep. They're not working alone. They've got more to call on, etc. So the next question is, I think, a really topical one that says, we've seen manufacturers change quickly in response to our current needs. For example, car manufacturers producing respirators for the NHS. How can we build on this to increase the green transformation and using transferable skills into green products and greener services? Shall I go with you, Tim?
Well, what's been interesting about this move is that it shows that it can be done. There are so many doubters out there who say it's all too difficult and all too complicated, and actually, when there's a desire, from on the part of government to make something happen, it can mobilize industry, it can mobilize civil society, in a really, really important way. So, I do think in a way we can talk about climate change and COVID-19 in the same way. People say climate change is not an emergency because it's not something that's happening in the next 6 months. Well, it's something that's happening, we've got 10 years to get this right. And, 10 years is not 6 months, but 10 years is a really, really short amount of time in historical terms. And we can't afford to get it wrong. So, the issue, manufacturers changed it as a result of direction from government. Government can use all sorts of regulations, all sorts of tax incentives to encourage companies to move in a certain direction. They can inject cash in to make sure that companies can reskill their workers to make this happen. There are all kinds of things that an active government can do with a sense of emergency to make this change. And next year we've now got the date for the COP26. It's going to be taking place in November next year, a little later than I would have liked, to be honest. But we've got to wait a full year for that. But we cannot afford to fail at COP26. We really can't afford to fail. We failed at COP25, and we can't do that again. And the UK government is now in the chair. Responsibility for making this work happens with us. So it's for our government. It's for our government to kind of pull its finger out, frankly, and make sure that it puts the levers in. That means engaging the Treasury. Engaging the Treasury is crucial. If the Treasury that holds the purse strings isn't in the room, these things don't happen. We need the Treasury in the room helping to drive this, Treasury in the Cabinet Office with strong lead from the Prime Minister driving this. But, it's not just down to businesses. Businesses can do it, but we need the national push to make that happen, and that has to come from government.
Thanks, Tim. I think we've probably got time for maybe a couple more questions. We've had a huge, we've covered a huge sort of range of topics, but a couple more that we've not touched on at all. So there's one that asks, would a green policy template that can be negotiated with the employer be a starting point to identifying and implementing a green strategy? So presumably this is a policy that green reps or other reps would negotiate within an individual workplace. So shall I go with Graham first or Sarah? Graham, then Sarah.
I think that's going to be really important to give people a bit of a steer as to the kinds of standards they would want to see in some kind of agreement with the employer on this. So I know that, again, in UCU, we've produced some resources for our members, which kind of sets out the kind of criteria that we should be looked at when it comes to that kind of thing. And in the new publication, there's also, the one that's being launched today on green skills. There's a reference in there to the kind of checklist of things that unions need to consider when they're going to be raising the issue of skills with their employer. So that kind of those kind of templates and guidance, I think, are going to be really important, because people don't need to make up their own. There's examples of good and bad practice on this, and we need to make sure that in terms of the resources and the information that we're supplying to our reps and our members, that we emphasise the good practice that's out there.
Yeah, absolutely, Graham. I think we all need to remember sometimes that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's often something you can start with. Did you want to add anything to that, Sarah?
I was just trying to find my my little booklet from the TUC that I kind of give to our reps and encourage them to look at, which has got the checklist in the back of what you can do in your workplace, but I can't find it. I've not got it to hand. But Graham's right. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's all sorts of things out there, and sometimes knowing where to start those discussions is very difficult. So having something like a policy template that the union can put together and give you as a framework to start with would be a fantastic resource, especially if you're new into the role.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. The booklet that you're talking about, what did it look like? We might be able to dig out a link to it on the website.
It's A5. I'll find it whilst we're sat here. I'll find it.
What colour was it?
It's something like green in your workplaces or something like that.
Okay. All right. This is a challenge for colleagues who are in the chat. If you can find it and post a link to it before Sarah finds it, maybe that's that can be the challenge for the last few minutes of the webinar. Okay. So a question that we've had is a sort of a broader one, really, that says a lot of the discussion so far today has looked at expanding trade unionism to take in green issues. Have you got any advice on practically getting individuals involved there it is. Sorry, halfway through the question. There's the booklet from Sarah. I think, is that A4 rather than A5? No, it's A5. Okay. Okay, I think that's maybe still available. If someone can find post a link to it. Great. Sorry, I was in the middle of a question there. So where were we? Yes, a lot of discussion has looked at expanding trade unionism to take in green issues. Have you got any advice on getting individuals involved whose political awakening is environmentalism to start with, and how you can get them working within a union? Okay, that's, I think, quite a broad question. Let's start with you, Tim.
Well, I think, it goes back to a point I made earlier that young people are pushing this, particularly. We've talked a lot in the last decade about how young people are politically disengaged, and yet one area where young people are absolutely engaged is the environmental agenda, the green agenda. And I mentioned earlier that's a challenge for us. It's also a great opportunity for us. Trade unions are often accused of being, white middle-aged men. I mean, we see from this webinar that we're not all white middle-aged men, and that's really, really great. But attracting more women, attracting more Black people, attracting more young people into our movement is a challenge. And this is something that young people are particularly concerned about. It's a great opportunity for us. The TUC is always looking at ways, how we broaden our organising agenda to link up with community campaigns and to link up with new sources of growth for us, where when we work together, we're stronger than we're working as separate campaigns. So I hope in all of the webinars that Unionlearn puts on, not just today's one, but all of them, I hope they showcase, and I'm sure they do showcase, that trade unions are a great organisation for campaigning across a whole range of issues. The same young people who are concerned about the environment, too often they're on 0 hours contracts, too often they're low paid, too often they're exploited. All the issues that trade unions have been campaigning on for years are absolutely as relevant to those young people as the environmental agenda is. So I hope we can be broad-based organisations that take on the environmental challenge, but also take on the workplace challenge. And as a social organisation, as a social campaigning organisation, we can make some of these links and tie them together. Our movement has no future unless we get young people involved. So this is a challenge for us as trade unions, and it's a challenge we need to pick up.
Absolutely, like really wise words there, I think, to move forward. Graham, any comments on that?
Yeah, I think actually, skills can be a focus for engaging new people in union work, and particularly young members, because, when people leave school, where they've often spent some time looking at climate change issues and then go into the world of work, they often find that there's no real relationship between what they were learning at school and what's happening in the workplace. So I think there's an opportunity there, and we've heard there's been an Open University report this month showing that workers want more direction from their employers on the sort of skills that they should be taking up. There's been, during the lockdown, a big increase in people thinking about skills development and how they can use this opportunity. So it's important that, over the next period, unions are involved in trying to channel that interest and making sure that their employers are responding as well. In terms of using this to get a new generation of activists within unions, I think there are real possibilities here. And it should be pushing at an open door. I noticed that Jim Mowat from Unite's on the chat. And Unite, I think, produced a survey recently showing that something like 97% of those union reps that were surveyed talked about the importance of the green economy. So there is a recognition of this out there. In UCU, there's been a huge increase in the number of green reps in UCU. So that's been a growing area of our activist base. We've got 300 green reps, I think. And a lot of people who haven't previously taken on a role in their union have seen this as something that they want to engage in, and actually something that you can be proactive around. So it's not unions just being defensive, trying to maintain, although that's important, conditions of employment and wages and that sort of thing, but we can actually be proactive and be looking towards the future and the kind of economy and the work that we think would actually be socially useful as well as rewarding.
Thanks, Graham. And before I ask Sarah for her thoughts on this, it's just great to see in the chat panel some ideas about how to involve young people in unions, and an example in Sheffield where the Trades Council linked up with the local youth climate strikers, I'm assuming, and supporting them and getting them to come and speak in union branches, because these are our future members or future potential members, so we do need to hear from them. Okay, we're nearly done, so I'm just going to leave the final comments to Sarah before we sum up.
I think Lucinda that mentioned around Sheffield's Trades Council and the work kind of hits the nail on the head. The way to engage people and bring them into the movement is to listen to them and stand by them when they're fighting for their issues. Being a trade unionist does not stop at the workplace door. It affects us in our communities as well. So, being involved in the climate strike actions, talking to the young people that are involved and active, letting them know that the trade unions are interested in what they're doing and we stand in solidarity with them is massive. Being involved in the ITUC Day on the 24th of June, all these things show that we are taking an interest, we are engaging, we are being proactive, and we want to be there and we want to stand with them, and that in turn will then draw them into the trade union movement with us. We need to learn from each other.
We do, and I think that's a really good note to finish on. We've covered a huge amount in the last very nearly an hour, so all that remains to say is to thank all you for tuning in. You've been fantastic, and the chat was incredibly busy. Lots of great ideas and comments and some really insightful questions, so thank you everybody for that. Thank you to Sarah, to Graham and to Tim for joining us today for this important discussion. And don't forget to check out the report that Unionlearn have launched today. And if you live in Wales, look out for the guidance that is being produced for workplace reps that will be coming in the coming weeks. That will all be available on the website. So all remains for me to say is stay safe, everybody. Have a good rest of the day and a good weekend. Hopefully it will be sunshine everywhere. And we'll see you again soon for another webinar. Bye-bye for now.